No, all right, welcome to this panel discussion. We have now in the end of to close the day, if you like, we have a great panel. I start from here. We have, as you know, Humera Fasihuddin from Stanford, Kalle Airo from Aalto, Ken Singer from Berkeley, Thomas Hellmann from Oxford, and then Paul Savage from Aalto. Welcome, everybody. Let's give another big hand. Mega hand. And yes, I'm a Finn, so I'll skip all small talk and I'll go directly to the topic. First of all, thank you, Thomas, Ken, Humera. You've had excellent talks you had delivered today. All of you are emphasizing the need to educate entrepreneurship, almost like to everybody, right? Why is it? I mean, we don't teach electromechanics or fashion design or accounting to everybody. Why should we teach entrepreneurship to everybody? Isn't it enough that we educate entrepreneurship to those at the Department of Entrepreneurship who want to major in entrepreneurship? Why should we teach entrepreneurship to others?
Well, I liken it a little bit to the topic of ethics. Could you major in the entire discipline of ethics? Gosh, I hope not. I hope that doesn't happen anywhere. But ethics is applied to the healthcare field, for example, in medicine. Ethics can be applied to automotive design and ignition switches in vehicles. You need it sort of embedded in just about every discipline in order for students to know how to get things done. And I think that's really the key bit, no matter how they get things done, be it through a venture or some other means.
So you mean it's something more like fundamental? No, but isn't entrepreneurship it's like one discipline among other disciplines, right? I mean,
as it stands today, and I think that's. I mean, I'd like to think that it's a little bit of a historical issue that. So I have an MBA, full admission. Can't knock business schools.
That's okay.
But I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. But when it comes to business and all things with the word business in it, entrepreneurship, business programs take claim for entrepreneurship and have made it a discipline, okay. But I think that entrepreneurship is meaningless without context. So entrepreneurship comes to life when applied to a challenge, an area, a discipline, a field, and that's more interesting. Studying it for the sake of studying how things get off the ground, I would never major in entrepreneurship. Mm-hmm. Sorry to all of you who do.
So what do you say, Thomas?
So I'll be very clear. I don't think entrepreneurship should be taught to every student. I think your basic premise is actually correct. And I think this is where we have to be so sensitive to the use of the words, because entrepreneurship, if we want to have a meaningful definition, is somehow the creation of a new venture, whatever that venture is. And a lot of us are no longer just talking about that. So as we're getting towards this high level of what I call the top of the funnel, we are dealing with something that is much broader. We still often describe it as entrepreneurial mindset. I don't like that word either. The best word I can come up with at that high level is problem-based thinking, or even that I don't like. Maybe it's problem-based thinking and action. Now, that's not very elegant English anymore. And so, I think we need to establish that language, and only then can we reach out and be relevant to the Shakespeare scholar, because they will never get what this entrepreneurship is about. By the way, I think the word entrepreneurship is awful, and I still struggle to spell it.
Okay, so I think everyone should learn entrepreneurship, but partly because that's my job. So that's my charter. So I'm just full disclosure. So the way that I look at it is that we are, as educators, we're trying to, if we're successful, create complete human beings by the time that they make it out of the university. And what that requires is that you keep a checkbook, you stay out of debt, you know how to do things, you know how to work with people, not have terrible fights, get along and produce something for society and for their families and for other people. Entrepreneurship is just a vehicle for learning all of those things. And when you have jumped into one particular discipline, let's say mechanical engineering, at least at Berkeley, you don't get much of an opportunity to learn things about team formation or accounting, which I think should be a standard thing that we teach. And I think with entrepreneurship, it's the catch-all, because if you don't get to take those other classes where you go deep into finance or deep into team formation or problem solving, in the context of trying to do your own startup, you're forced to see what's missing from your education, and you can fill those in. Because even you're like, hey, I realize I don't know how to do finance at all. I'm not going to be able to manage myself later. And at least that awareness gives them a sense of what they might need to be doing after they've graduated to backfill.
So let me just challenge this, because I think we're here to challenge each other.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think that Stephen Hawkins should have taken an entrepreneurship course? Or do you think that, I don't know, Arvo Pärt, the great Finnish composer, should have taken an entrepreneurship course?
Yes.
Yeah,
why not?
It might not have been called entrepreneurship. It could have been called something else. But the skills, the fundamental skills of knowing how to assess problems and bring things to life could be useful to everyone. And that's not to say that a class is necessary, actually, right? We try to make ourselves useful in academia, but actually people learn from doing. And so there are many people out there who have been very successful at just learning by doing what they would have gotten in a class.
Well, you mentioned skill set. Thomas mentioned mindset, and is both of them like important for all, or is it like mindset is for somebody and then skill set for somebody else? Or there a difference?
We always put an ampersand in between, an and sign, right?
Okay.
It's a skill set and a mindset.
For all people?
For all.
How about Paul, Kalle?
We also, by the way, add attitude to that. It's an attitude and a skill set.
But isn't mindset same as attitude, no? Comes close.
I don't know.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Paul, Kalle.
I come out of 20 years of the logistics and shipping business before I started my PhD. Plus, I'm actor and director, so that Shakespearean element with a master's in culture and arts. I look at what we did when I was working in logistics, and I think we have a need to be entrepreneurial, to have that mindset, to have that skill set, even within organizations of 28,000 people. I've also been an entrepreneur in a failed situation that ended up quite badly. I lost a lot of money and a lot of things changed in my life. And I think without that skill set, we are struggling even in our corporate life, and this is true for our students. They're going to encounter, I think, this environment that you're talking about that requires being inspired, being engaged. Whether they go to the final step of a venture, that's almost secondary to our role as educators, I think.
Mm-hmm. Kalle.
Okay, so I think that this is about changing behavior. And sometimes it's mindset, sometimes skill set. But if we go to a kindergarten teacher, tell them that you should be entrepreneurial. They might laugh at us or they might just ignore us. But if we tell them that this is how you organize your daily life in your kindergarten better, this is kind of crucial part of your profession, they will be interested. And this is kind of subset of the entrepreneurial skills that we are talking about here. And I think that we should inspire by doing first and then telling what you actually did. I can teach an electrical engineer product development and only after the fact that, hey, this was lean startup process that you used. If I try to tell these guys that you should be interested in lean startup, they would not become interested in that thing. So I think that there's kind of this entrepreneurship, this vague thing, and for all students, there's some part of that that's relevant. both in the skill set and mindset. And that would be where the impact comes from, not from the entrepreneurial courses as such, because the people who are interested in our kind of flagship courses in any of our universities, they would learn the skills somewhere anyway. They want to start a company, they look for all the support that they can get. So it's nice to help these guys, but it's more important to actually teach the people who don't know that they should learn these things.
Yeah, I just completely agree with what you said, and it kind of goes back to what Thomas said, in that the word entrepreneurship is terrible. It means, fundamentally, obviously, it's not, but if we actually slice the many different types of entrepreneurship, you just spoke of entrepreneurship at the shipping company. We've talked about entrepreneurship in running a venture. There's the entrepreneurial mindset in being able to manage your life, your checkbook, raise your kids. I think that entrepreneurship, the word, needs a rebranding in education in a way that use of language allows you to frame it in the terms necessary to resonate with the architect, the designer, the artist, fundamentally just every major across campus. I think that's the great opportunity that academia has, is to take what's already been developed in entrepreneurship and to say, venture creation is not for everyone, that's just one slice. But to take the fundamental elements and apply it to these different areas in order to rapidly advance how those disciplines are taught and how students are being tooled up to become that profession.
Yeah. So,
I mean, let me just take
Thomas.
Let me just take it one step further. If we agree with that, the rephrasing of that, why is it universities and why not high schools? If we really believe this is a universal skills, this should have been done by the time you get to university.
Yeah, no question. In fact, Finland is a great example of that K through 12 environment.
Should it? I mean, do you think that this should be taught already at high school or even elementary school? What do you think?
So I have gotten involved in several programs that do start at the high school. There is a significant difference in the quality of work that comes out of high school versus college. I would say the work in high school is better, to be honest.
Well, the data bears out that
this is
students...
filmed. All this is filmed.
There's data that says that students going into engineering programs are more creative than when they come out. That suggests that high schools are producing a more creative person, someone who's open, someone who's thinking divergently. And so things happen, correctly at the young age where students are allowed to play and experiment and encouraged to explore. And we need to get back to some of those fundamentals and stretch them throughout more of the later years of high school, I would say.
I want to add something here, and it's going to be filmed, so this is awkward. So that's never prevented me from putting my foot in my mouth.
Go ahead.
So I think at Berkeley, we have there's a tension. Berkeley is known for rigorous research, okay? And so you have this commercializing entity, right? This entrepreneurship program. And every now and again we get somebody bares their teeth, from one of the departments. And one very famous professor at one point had students around, and he's like, well, I think entrepreneurs are born, they're not made. And so I don't think you can do anything to become an entrepreneur in front of all of these students. And he looks at me and says, right, Ken? And I'm like, okay, so my job is to educate people to become entrepreneurs. This guy knows that and has put me completely on the spot. He's a famous person, right? So I'm having to go up against. So culturally we have this. And I think part of the reason why there's a discomfort in having entrepreneurship education at a university is that on some level it is an indictment on how terrible our educational system is. Because when students go through these courses, they realize in many cases they've chosen the wrong major, they're in the wrong engineering or the wrong humanities, or they're taking business classes, they should be doing something else. that they are not learning things that are relevant in their classes, that they would rather be working on a project that has actual outcomes rather than doing rote memorization. It is an indictment of what we do every day as educators. And I hear this a lot from my students. And I think an institution like universities, their goal is to perpetuate what has been done before. That's what an institution is about, with incremental changes, right? Not too much disruption. Entrepreneurship encourages a level of disruption that is going to be uncomfortable. And this is where, I think this is where the friction's gonna be. How much disruption will your campus be willing to take? How much can it take before it breaks? And I think that's where the discussion is, really, how much is going to be there.
Plus one, and to add to that, there's also this notion that academia has the answers. So there's also this inherent discomfort with students forging ahead, creating new knowledge alongside academia, rather than being the source of knowledge.
Okay, so let me be the one who doesn't play by the rules again. I'll sort of beg to differ, putting on my faculty hat. And so I think the part that the entrepreneurship centers don't understand about faculty is how difficult it is to be a researcher. If you want to survive, we actually, on the academic side, have very clear performance measures. They're basically worldwide competition. And I think part of the thinking of the professors is we're really dealing with the hard stuff. And I think the prejudice then against the entrepreneurship side, since I live on both sides, is that they're dealing with the trivial, the easy stuff. Oh, well, it's just about either making money, which is sort of commercial and dirty, or it's the easy stuff and it's only the weakest students. I think on the entrepreneurship side, we have to get better at formulating to what extent what we're doing is actually very hard, but comes in a different dimension to the dimension that academics are pushing on, and that's why we sort of have this miscommunication.
But there's a conflation between research and teaching. So the researching component of the university, fantastic, right? They need to be doing stuff, and I know that there's still blurring there now, right? But on the teaching side, what we're proposing in entrepreneurship is a new methodology of teaching, where it is not the Brahmin in front and telling students what to know, right? Because an entrepreneurship student, if they're going to be doing something new, by definition, they will be the expert, and the professor will be the student, because that student has to teach you what they're discovering on the edges of this commercialization activity they're on. So that's an uncomfortable role reversal, right? But I'm talking just within teaching, there is an ongoing revolution happening in which the roles are changing. And at Berkeley, we don't talk about professors and students, we talk about Sherpas and entrepreneurs. We are there to guide. We're not there to be the ones with the answers, because we talked about this earlier. Every time I've given advice, I've been wrong. A student has proven me wrong later and saying, no, there's actually a market like Bitcoin. I was totally wrong on that one, and that's on film, actually. I was totally wrong on that one. Very expensive mistake. So I've learned, I can only help guide.
Yeah, but
Sherpa Kalle.
Yeah, you mentioned the learning process. So that's the universities talk about teaching, and many of us are talking about learning. So it's learning process of the student. Mm-hmm. We are guiding that. We don't know where it leads. It's not like a quality system thing where we can tell that this is the framework, these guys will learn this framework, they will memorize these things. We don't know what they learn. And that's scary for the system, of course. And that's totally different from teaching. It's about the learning process, how we do that. And at the same time, that's the identity building thing. So the process of building the identity, if you are an art student, money is bad, business is bad. It hurts mentally to start doing things with money. And also with the professors, like you mentioned, being used to be the expert in the room for 30 years. It hurts to be the guy who doesn't know, but is good in asking questions. So this is kind of different way of looking at what we are actually doing. So growing as a human being, learning, and then us co-learning as educators. It's education, not training, from my point of view.
Before I give, I let Humera to say what she has on her mind. I just want to remind you or tell you that you will have soon a possibility to ask questions as well. So please prepare your questions. Humera, please.
Oh, I was just going to go back to something. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And Thomas, to your earlier positioning as rule breaker, I would urge you to consider breaking the rules even further to say, yes, faculty do have an incredible challenge of managing a research role and a teaching and learning role. I would argue that teaching and learning has not been invested in the way that it should be, and at the sacrifice of our students, at the sacrifice of the preparedness of our young people to deal with and contribute to society. And I think that we really actually need to disrupt things even further. Academic institutions, at least in the US, they get less and less money from the federal government. They have to grasp research dollars in order just to make ends meet. It's not good enough. We have to figure out how to make ends meet, how to enable faculty such as yourself to both do the great research, but invest in the high quality teaching and learning.
Well, in Thomas, in your talk, you mentioned the word vocational. So isn't this all this what you are telling? Isn't this too kind of vocational? Does it really belong to an academic institution?
I guess what is the point of students going to the university? Is it to learn theory and then not be employed? Because essentially the whole bottom rung of industry has been knocked out, at least in the US. Those entry-level jobs don't exist, those management training programs, they're few and far in between. And so if we want students to be able to enter professions, they have to have experience. And an internship isn't gonna cut it. They need those experiences in the classroom. They need them prolifically outside of the classroom. They should have a portfolio of projects that they're able to speak to in order to land that job and be competitive.
And I think students have an expectation that after a college degree that they should be able to be employed, right? And I think if we have a system that allows for that the students go through, I make the argument that the entrepreneurship class, if you have it structured right, it will give students a better sense of what role that they should play in a company or in industry or a field. But more importantly, they get to see the entire cycle. So when they go work for, say, an Apple or Facebook, they know how the sausage is made. They know what money, that there has to be revenue at the end, and they can see the sense of how value is created and extracted. And having that, they're no longer a cog, right? They now understand the system. And I think they're going to be better contributors having gone through that.
Cool.
My master's is from University of Applied Science, which I think is a much more vocational in media management. We did not read theory very much. So when I came to the doctoral program, and I was introduced to sociology, to behavioral psychology, organizational behavior, these were all massively new topics for me. I think one of the things that's missing sometimes in my own education at the vocational university or University of Applied Science is this thing that, yes, we're always in teams and we were always working on projects. We were always doing things that were applied immediately to normal life, but we were missing this understanding of the human being, this understanding of society, of the role of the individual, of the group, of the tribes. And this is where I think we do a little bit disservice to the teaching, researching university, that we don't give credit to the 200 years of, I think, very strong academic theory building that has occurred, that tells us the different ontologies and epistemologies that are needed to show up at Apple and understand there's a lot of weird sort of power relationships here that I sense, but I'm not sure I don't know what's going on.
Kalle?
So
Then
in
Thomas.
most countries, the most respected academic degrees are totally vocational. Lawyers, profession that you learn at the university, and doctors. And out of doctors is manual labor. Surgeons are the most kind of valued. And still they are academic, they are respected, they have the academic component, they have the practical component. So I think that there is kind of several hundred years of history behind universities doing these things that we could do with entrepreneurial skills also.
Thomas,
I mean,
what do you say?
I think these comments are actually really excellent in the sense that I think we have to understand what has changed in the world. And it used to be that knowledge was scarce, and the research university model was based. There are people with something very unique. They actually understand a complex matter, and they can bring it to our students. And that's obviously gone with the internet and the MOOC and all of that. So I think you're absolutely right. This is very scary from a traditional professor, because we're the ones who are supposed to know, and all of a sudden everybody knows it already. So, which I think also explains, I think the vocational question is spot on, because I think it puts precisely its finger on, I think, an arrogance in academia that vocational is lower quality.
Right.
Let's just call it. That's what it is. There was implicit a hierarchy. There are the knowledge people at the top, and then the vocational that come below it. And I think we have to move away from that, because it's just not true today. If you think of the most bright student coming out of a high school, what you want them to do is obviously understand the frameworks, obviously understand and have the knowledge base, operate in it. And that requires creativity, resilience, things that we have somehow declassified as vocational. Right. But they're actually absolutely essential. If you want to be the CEO of a large company, you're going to need these things, and we're definitely not teaching them in the traditional way.
And it's interesting you say that, because I totally agree with you, and there's a weird kind of secondary effect to that, which is the engineering schools and business schools, which were considered vocational before, they have tried to become rigorous by becoming much more academic and become paper-based. And so if you look at academics in business schools, a lot of them have never actually been in business, but they have these very rigorous papers that they publish everywhere. And it creates this weird kind of third effect, I think, which is it becomes a rankings chase. So both engineering schools and business schools, their rankings drive how they construct their education and their pedagogy. So I know at many business schools, including ours, again, it's on film, they don't really teach the act of starting companies. They do it very academically in order for those credits to count towards accreditation. And I know that most business schools, including ours, they do not encourage students to start companies, because one of the major ranking points is what is your starting salary when you leave university and when you leave an MBA. So if you start a company, it is zero. So there are people at these universities whose job is to encourage students to go work for the highest paid position that they got. I'm not kidding. There are people whose jobs are to do that.
And just to clarify on that, apparently, at least the Financial Times ranking says that they don't count people who are entrepreneurs. But the problem continues to exist, because if you join a startup, your salary is also miserable. And so that, which I think, if you want leaders, you also need followers, you need early employees. That's right. And the rankings certainly can't deal with that.
It drives that, right? Engineering, the same thing. There's a lot of this ranking thing that drives people's behavior. And it's just kind of the tail that wags the dog. One of the things that we face is trying to change things.
Well, and to get to your point about vocational training and theory, I think that if you were to give me a ton of theory before I entered the business world, it would have gone in one ear and out the other. Honestly, what brings it to life is the application of that theory to something that is relevant and useful to you. And if you haven't had projects or expertise or experiences that allow you to internalize it and metabolize it, then how can you possibly learn? So that's where the vocational project-based piece has to become married to theory so that students can truly flourish. And I think that is something that, why not do both in our programs?
Nothing is as practical as a good theory, right? So you are mentioning that we need to change, right? We need to value theoretical and vocational, or academic and vocational equally, and so on. So how would you change the university system? How would you change your universities in practice? If you could change the university, how would you do that?
That you have to come in undeclared.
What's that?
You have to come in undeclared, that you cannot declare a major until your second year.
You agree?
There are so many obstacles in my university that I can't even.
You know this is on film, right? I just want to...
I hope my
This is the benefit of being tenured, by the way.
I hope my university watches this. It is a very difficult question. I mean, part of me, and this is not the most audacious statement or not the most aggressive way, is I do think that there is a generational issue, and for this is going to take a generation to wash through the system.
A generation.
One generation.
Thank goodness.
Like that very specific. 8 was very specific.
2 minus 1 equal 1. No, because I see a big difference. So, for example, in an engineering school, I see a big difference between the young, untenured faculty who actually want to engage, who are open to teaching in much more innovative ways, and senior colleagues who don't want to do it, and sometimes may look down on the junior faculty. But I would start with junior faculty as really a group that is interested, and maybe if we can start priming them during their graduate studies, I think there's room for action there.
Kalle.
So something that's actually happening already, but I would make the students to do the thing they want to study during the first year. So if I want to be an engineer, not the basic maths only during the first year, building a moving robot the first year. And then the math makes sense. Why do I need to understand this kind of math to make the control systems work in the robot? And then the thing that's not going to happen, but I'd like to see, mandatory totally random course. I come here as a finance student, you make me study microbiology for one course. I cannot choose. And totally random, not chosen that this would be kind of good random fit. I'm guessing that will be kind of admin nightmare, but if I had the power to make it happen, I would.
I see great potential in changing the way all faculty teach. Of course, that doesn't happen overnight, but I think that teaching and learning centers are presently not optimized. I think that that's an area that if universities could get behind really high quality pedagogy and the way that's done, and then provide technical assistance to faculty to embed project-based learning and entrepreneurial lessons in whatever it is they're teaching, I think that you could see some major change at the institution.
Mm-hmm. Any other? Paul?
My thing is maybe a little bit more ambitious, and perhaps for that reason not likely to fly, but would be that within the faculty and the administration, that there would be some kind of movement or training, I'd hate to use that term, or introduction to this mindset. I don't know what that would mean. I think it would have an effect. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I meant by teaching and learning centers, because those are organizations, at least in the US, I don't know how it's done in Europe, but those are centers whose responsibility is to help change teaching and train faculty to change the way they're teaching. I don't think it happens very well at most institutions in the US, but needs to.
I mean, I think along with this, and precisely sort of based on what you're saying, it then becomes a question of the incentive system for faculty. And I mean, there's no question that things are stacked against teaching. It's definitely shoved in the, well, just don't embarrass us category. And I think I actually wonder to what extent this can come all the way from a governmental policy level. It can certainly come from a university senior administration level, where at the policy level you can say we have to take that third role of the university very important, and it is around something around impact. And if we're going to start measuring it seriously, we can then create reward systems at the university level that I would still say that it's only going to be maybe 1 in 2 or 2 in 5, 2 in 3, or I don't know how many. Not all faculty will want to go to that, but at least allow those who want to and who are currently being blocked to experimenting and delivering, I think, will be much better teaching.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting that there's two conversations. One is what you can do with the faculty, and then what you can do with the students. I mean, I love what you're doing with your program of empowering students to act, and I think there might be a cultural difference here. Americans, I think we spend a lot of time empowering and talking about empowering our students, and that's why I think for me having that first year that it's unscripted, that you are undeclared, because how can you I remember being 18, that's a long time ago, but being 18 and going, what should I do with my life? Should I apply to an engineering school? Should I apply to a business school? Like, I don't know what I want to do. And that sets you for the rest of your life. And the way that you make a decision when you're 18 is, what's the best thing I got into, right? What's the best university? What's the one that my parents are going to be proud of telling their friends that I'm Asian, by the way, so this is like kind of a thing. So, that is how you make decisions. You optimize for other people at 18. And so the first class I'd require everyone to take is how to make decisions for yourself. And it's going to take a long time for people to get that, but in one semester, maybe you could have a few other methods of decision making to give students agency so that they can make the best choices and they get into a career that is suited for them. Because right now we're not doing that. We're having kids do things that are, respected by the older generation and not by them.
Let's take Humera and then we take questions from the audience.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up about students. At the end of the day, the University Innovation Fellows Program is really sort of putting in students in the role of catalyzing action, right? Because there's inaction in the absence of students understanding this vision of what could be, helping other students understand that, and demonstrating the deep desire and excitement to participate in something like that, which serves as a magnet for faculty and administration, provides the rationale to invest, shows alumni that their dollars won't just go towards operational expense and be gone. It's getting the gears moving on change, and that's the strategic aspect of students, but it really is a partnership of all. It's sort of like the grassroots, demand side building, as well as the top sort of leadership, and then the faculty buy-in with incentives.
Alrighty, so then, are there any questions in the audience? There's the first one here. First row.
So let's talk about difficult things. How do you assess that you're doing a good job in conveying this to students? How do you assess that?
So could you raise the mic a little bit?
I was trying to say, let's talk about difficult things. And in my view, a difficult thing is, how do you assess that you're doing a good job?
Okay, how do you assess? How do you measure?
How do you measure that?
Well,
how do you measure your vocational thing that is good for everybody, kind of foundation for everything, right?
So at the D School, we assess, all students are assessed, students get grades, but what's assessed? It's their process. What process do they undergo? How do they learn? How do they iterate on what they learned? And so really sort of understanding the process that the student went through and their own understanding of that through reflection. And so there's multiple ways, but that should give you a brief sense.
Yeah, so from my point of view, kind of the pedagogical side, the learning side is very much like that. So it's validated learning and the reflection, and the teachers are supposed to be deep enough in pedagogy to understand whether these guys learn. But the societal thing is looking for outliers, not averages. If we get one unicorn company out of a startup program, then most likely that was worth it. Or if we get then kind of things that are harder to measure, our students actually build better business that actually makes the society a better place for some publicly listed company. That's hard to track, but there are stories then of these outliers. Some of these people will be known, some of them won't be, and we should then kind of measure the ones we can track. But it's not about how many companies, how many students, what are the averages.
So we have a couple different ways to look at it. We just actually got a unicorn, so I'm just going to point out that we're like, that was awesome.
Let's give a big hand.
He was in my class about 8 years ago, went back to Hong Kong, and then built a company. So I have it was 8 years ago. It's not I'll take the credit though. But we have several companies like that we have great examples, and we keep track of our students who are moving forward and make sure that they have access to our services even as they become alums, just so that we are with them during the journey. And we try to highlight that because they come back and help teach. I'm actually an alum that came back to teach. So I just got stuck in the system. I didn't, when you come back, they kind of suck you in. But that's one thing, is to have these, highlight the big wins, right? And because you need stories to tell campus why you're doing things. But I would say about 10% of our students, as their students, will start a company that is legitimately, that has a possibility of becoming something. 90% of them end up not going down that path. But we count those as successes if they can tell us at the end of school or in our class, if they can tell us, I learned that I want to do this, or I learned I don't want to do this other thing. If they can voice some amount of awareness of the things that they're good at, what they're not good at, and can make better choices around their career, then that's a success. And we've had plenty of kids who have gone on to say, hey, I'm going to go into consulting because I want a paycheck and I don't like working on this thing. I want to be jumping from big company to big company. And that's great. And other kids decide, hey, I'm going to be an accountant because I do not like chaos. This class was fun, but this is not the way I want to live my life, right? And that's a success to us. So as long as they can voice some amount of awareness and control over where they're going, it's on them now, and we're done. It's what we've been able to provide them.
So finding out that entrepreneurship is not for me is also a learning, right?
Right. Because otherwise, it could become regret later.
Yeah. Any other metrics?
I think we're just, the measurement has two dimensions to it. One is just how do you give a grade to a student going through the program? And I think, in addition to this sort of journey-based grading, I think my favorite is pass-fail. I really dislike this emphasis of making a difference between an A and an A-, and it really is, I think, very artificial in this context. So if I could have my choice, all of my courses would be pass-fail. The second level, I think, is the really difficult one about how do you assess the programs. And even though I agree with everything, I'm worried that, partly learning to fail is such a life skill that my temptation would be we get assessed 30 years later, and for 30 years we should get funding until that first assessment comes out.
I think we should do that for big CEOs as well. Yeah. Let's wait maybe 10 years
That's
after
right.
they leave. Yeah.
Airo has a question there.
Well, I hope this won't be filmed, okay. So, as I'm responsible for what Kalle is doing, all is doing, so in Aalto University scorecard, we have a measure called value of business created. And I would say that's a bit suicidal. Because how to measure that, and because there's so many transfer effects, but that is there. And there's not a single measure, so it would be easy just to be counted how many start with it, etc. Then what comes to employment and revenue, that's trickier. Investments, the start of it, etc. Exit, etc. Etc. But the point is that by declaring that we care for value of business created in startups, so it's manifestation that this matters, and luckily so we have a decacorn because we've got Supercell for 10 billion and it's funny that some policymakers that it's an outlier But I would say that this whole skill about pay off for the society, so it's about outliers. The whole phenomenon is just that. But okay, so we are doing that, but does it make sense or not? I don't know.
Well, you know, in the US, outliers are actually considered a good thing. Like, I think in Finland, maybe that's a different conversation. Do you invest in the outlier or do you invest in, you know, everyone else? And that's, in the US, we should probably have more of a conversation on that, though we might be healthier as a society. But that is kind of the challenge, is that tension between the two. I have to say, the outliers in the Bay Area have done some amazing things. They've done some terrible things as well, but like Google, Facebook, these big companies that didn't exist maybe 20 years ago, they are investing in research now, and they've come to Berkeley and said, we will pay for an additional, each company, an additional 100 PhDs in certain topics, right? So it's not just investing in startups or programs on campus. They're literally funding, because there's not enough of these PhDs in big data and machine learning, and they're going to be funding that kind of stuff. So there is this this cycle, and if you've taught your students well enough about this pay it forward concept, you know, they become CEOs later, and they're going to make a bigger investment back and be that example. So, you know, Google and Facebook, they didn't go to Berkeley, although Eric Schmidt did. So I think that's one of the reasons they're at Berkeley. But the big companies that were small before, they become your investors in your future development.
All right. So we have next question here, Ayman.
Yeah.
Please.
There's a reckoning that's happening in the academic world. There's an article coming out next month from Academy of Management talking about research in the social sciences. And the research that's coming out saying 60% of the research that's coming out can't be replicated, right? And so there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of credibility in the sense of how are you producing this research? So there's a serious questioning saying, what is the research that you're doing here? Because we can't replicate it, we don't have access to the databases. So there's a reckoning coming here. And there's a lot of noise coming out now from the practitioners, the vocation people, saying you guys in the ivory tower that justified all this top research that you're doing, let's sit and actually see what really matters here. And this is across the board, across all disciplines. There's like, it's coming to fruition now where there's this serious debate that's going to happen where you're going to sit at the table saying, you say you're busy, you say you have no time because you're doing this research, show me that research. Show me where is the impact. Show me your databases. And that's going to trigger an avalanche of changes because now everybody needs to justify exactly what their impact is. That's a very fascinating topic if we can come back here in 2-3 years and see how the domain has that. The free pass for researchers is coming to an end. Now they actually have to justify themselves in terms of impact.
But this is an argument for a broader education for people, because those researchers, if had they taken more statistics from math, right, they may understand what statistical certainty looks like, right?
But in particular, entrepreneurship.
Right.
Entrepreneurship, the discipline itself, needs to re-examine this, because we see a bridge that's happening between entrepreneurship researchers and actually practitioners and educators. That reckoning needs to start having a serious conversation with. And it's an AOM article that's coming out. Herman Aguinas from Indiana University, George Washington University is coming out with it. So I recommend you guys to look at this and start having this serious but very honest discussion about where is the connection. Thank you.
Thomas,
yeah,
is that happening?
So I mean, I think there's one question about sort of, you know, the ethics of research and the pressures, and I think there's some serious issues that we're going to have to. I think it's a slightly different topic than the key topic today. The impact question is very important. I actually think we can learn something from the UK here. They are, I don't think they're the only ones, but I'm not aware of anything like it in the US, but maybe it's coming as well. basically the government has established these frameworks of excellence, and it started with research excellence. They're introducing teaching excellence, and in the wings is discussions about knowledge exchange excellence. So all three aspects are going to be measured, and they're being measured in terms of impact. And it's quite interesting. Let me just mention two aspects of the research framework, which is the most established. It keeps changing every 5 years because there's a national debate about what should be measured. And initially it was basically, let's identify indicators of research quality, publications and things like that, patents. It has moved towards adding, not taking that away, but basically reducing the weight on that and increasing the weight on impact case studies, which are qualitative demonstrations, but to a very high level. You can't just say, I wrote an important paper and people read it. You have to have a documented trace of how an idea got into practice. And if I may, I just want to tell you one anecdote about that. I talked to somebody who works in this area and asked him, so who's actually good at this? It turns out that the best at this is the School of Divinity. That was very unexpected, because every time a new idea comes out of the School of Divinity, it gets straight to the priests and they preach it on Sunday in church. And so they have really strong impact. It wasn't the one I was thinking of.
All right, it's actually good to stop here. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Thomas, Ken, Kalle, Humera. Let's give a mega hand.